Johnson here, and we're so excited that you can join us. And we are really excited to have Elizabeth Lucht and Marina Smitherman here from Dalton State, and they are going to talk to us about semi-flipping the classroom, given the fact that we have only half an hour. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Elizabeth and Marina.
Hi, we want to welcome you. This is Elizabeth and
Marina, and we are excited to share with you today our guiding principles of activity design to help you flip your classroom one activity at a time. We're looking for our slides, guys.
Where'd they go?
Do you see the tab at the top that says semi-flip? There you go. And then you can just click back to slide 1.
Okay, good deal. Okay, so let's try that again. So what exactly is a semi-flip? It is a happy medium, a blend of traditional lecture with well-designed active learning assignments. You can think about it a little bit like learning to drive. In scenario 1, we have the traditional didactic lecture. I'm going to talk to you about how to drive, and then you're going to take your test. In scenario 2 is a flipped classroom. The students read the book outside the classroom, the theory book on taking the test, watch videos on driving, and then come to the test to take the driving test. In scenario 3 is a happy blend in the middle where you talk to them about how to use the brake, how to press the brake, and then immediately they get to try pressing the brake, and then you move on to, this is the accelerator, this is how you press the accelerator. So it's really a happy medium between a traditional didactic lecture and an engaged, active learning environment with a flipped classroom. Elizabeth and I both came at this from vastly different backgrounds. I was actually teaching in England in an institution used to expecting the students engaging in a completely flipped classroom. Students would read peer-reviewed journal articles, they would write essays, do problem-based learning, and come into the classroom to go through it and to talk about it at a high academic level. And I learned to design active learning assignments in that environment. When I came to Dalton State, what I observed was that my students frequently had several jobs, family obligations, and really very little time outside of the classroom, on top of perhaps less background than would be necessary for a college class. I teach sophomore level science classes predominantly. And so I went backwards from a flipped classroom to incorporating lecture to meet their expectations of my classroom and cover background before assisting them through the active learning assignments.
And I was actually trained while doing my graduate work through the teaching certificate and the future faculty program at UGA. And I was able to design the classes I hope to teach one day, already incorporating flipping of the classroom. As Marina said, here at Dalton, we have many non-traditional students with many expectations for their lives outside of the classroom. And I realized that although it was they would get a lot out of a flipped classroom, they weren't quite prepared enough for an entire flip. So instead, I introduced the semi-flip, which allowed this idea of I still give a little lecture, which helps ease some apprehension of students, but then we spend the majority of the class engaged in activities, and I can see their positive reactions to being able to understand the material through doing. Today, we're not advocating a complete course redesign. We really do, as Marina said, want a happy medium. We don't expect you, nor should you, try to flip a classroom all at once. Some topics are more appropriate than others for a flip. So if you pick one that lends itself to activities, you should set yourself up for success. Success is important when you're designing these flipped classrooms. You must do a really good job the first time because it's important that students have a positive experience. So by flipping one activity at a time, slow and steady wins, and it's a lower risk. You don't want your students to have a negative experience with the idea of active learning, but because they might shut themselves off for great future classes. So this idea of a happy medium, both you as a faculty member and your students need to get used to the idea of the semi-flip.
So we only have 20 minutes today, which is not that long to cover the theory behind this. But if it piques your interest having watched the webinar and you want more information, the basic underlying principle behind the activity design is what's called backward mapping, which was put forward in Dee Fink. You see on the left there under theory, Dee Fink's book, Creating Significant Learning Experiences. And the principle is this, that you construct a course backwards from what you expect the students to be able to do at the very end of your course, and then through to how you're going to assess that they actually are able to do that, then through activities that help them develop those skills and knowledge, and finally to how you're going to approach teaching it in the classroom. And if you want lots of other ideas, we've got a couple of great resources here, including John Bean's Engaging Ideas and Elizabeth Barkley's Student Engagement Techniques for more information. So what are we able to do today? In 20 minutes, we felt like we would go through, firstly, how to choose an appropriate topic. Like Elizabeth said, some things are easier to flip than others. I frequently hear some things how I have too much content to flip. And actually, our experience is that those subjects that have a lot of content are highly appropriate for an engaging active learning activity. And then we're going to secondly talk a little bit about how long the activity can be, because they can vary from something simple as 2 to 5 minutes all the way up to something that takes a couple of class sessions or even a month or so. And then we're going to introduce you to Elizabeth and Marina's guiding principles in activity design. Both of us have found our happy place designing these activities, and we wanted to share with you things that we feel help make them successful the first go around. And finally, lastly, we will work through a couple of examples of activities we've designed ourselves and how they meet these guiding principles.
So to start with, we'll help you think of what kind of topic would be appropriate. I invite you right now to take a second and think about a class that you currently teach as we go through how to choose your topic. When you're thinking about the class you're teaching, you should ask yourself these 4 questions to try to figure out what is appropriate. The first question is, what is the most challenging point that your students struggle with? So what do they not just understand after reading the textbook? What do they need a little extra help with? We all know, you see the same missed questions semester after semester. Pick one of those. Pick the one that you're frustrated because they've still missed it, even though you feel like you've said it in a different way. The second question, what are you expecting students to be able to do at the end in terms of assessment? So this goes back to what Marina was talking about, how we both prepare our classes using backward assessment. So backward design. You want to know what you're going to ask them and let them practice in that exact way so that the test isn't a gotcha. It's just a secondary experience after their first primary experience in the classroom. The third question, what concepts need to be placed in context for students to reach a deeper understanding? So what can they not just comprehend by reading a textbook or maybe even just watching a couple videos? And lastly, what content should students practice to reach mastery? The last 3 questions are interconnected. If you know what you're going to assess and you know what tends to trip up your students, then picking the right topic for a semi-flip means that you're going to give your students a chance to have deeper understanding and reach mastery before you test them and they're given a larger grade. Not all activities can be done in the same length of time.
So I work as director for the Center of Academic Excellence here. I work with a lot of faculty who have predominantly lectured, and the argument frequently to me is, well, I was lectured to, and I learned that way. I don't know where to start. And I think the simple answer is our students are very different from us. They aren't necessarily eternal learners like we are. And sometimes the simplest, quick classroom assessment techniques can be added as active lecture breaks. And so on the slide, you see a little word cloud of very short 2 to 5 minute classroom assessment techniques that can be incorporated as active lecture breaks very easily. Those are usually based around Socratic questions that you would generally pose yourself in class, and rather than expect an on-the-spec answer, give the students a few minutes to think about it. And those can range from a 1-minute paper to giving them the opportunity to reorder some steps of a pathway, or support a statement, a mini debate, if you will, or perhaps search for an error in a particular scenario. And so these are quick and easy, good ways to give the students an active break where they're focusing on the material without designing bigger activities. And to give you an example, these can be very short. In teaching anatomy and physiology, students frequently struggle to appreciate the idea of antagonistic muscles, or that muscles exist in equal and opposing groups. To allow one set to contract, the other set has to relax. And so I have a couple of students come to the front to demonstrate this, standing back to back, linking arms. And our tall girl in the pink here is our tricep muscle, and the shorter girl in the black is our bicep muscle, and we're seeing tricep extension to allow the bicep to contract. So these can be quick and easy ways to take a break, both for you and the student, and really reinforce a key point.
Once you've determined what topic is appropriate, and you've determined what length would be appropriate for your flip, the next thing is to actually design what you're going to do in the classroom. This is something that Marina and I both love to do, we're passionate about. There's nothing more energizing than being in the classroom and watching your students experience an active learning, and you see that glimmer of understanding and comprehension for a subject that has challenged your students in the past. It's constantly the missed question on your test. And we want you to be able to develop some activities like this as well and use the semi-flip in your classroom. So we came up with these guidelines, these guiding principles through our conversations over the past several years of examples within our own classes. And we want you to be able to use the arena of experiential learning activity design to help you design your own.
So what is the arena? Elizabeth and I believe these things are really critical to designing a successful active learning activity for a semi-flipped classroom. And the first of those is authentic. And really, particularly for millennial students, you have to put the students in a scenario that they will encounter or have encountered or possibly are likely to do in a future job, essentially a real world scenario. So for example, I will use a nurse for the day, or a pharmaceutical design, something that they actually, in teaching pre-medical students or pharmacy students will eventually need to be able to do.
It's important to give your students the feeling of responsibility, and one way of achieving that is give them each a specific role. Marina and I both prefer to do activities with group activities of students of 4 or fewer, and that allows each student to feel a need to participate, and it prevents students from sitting back and not engaging with your material. So examples of roles could be a timer, a scribe, the person who actually explains to the rest of the class, and a taskmaster. Our students think and live differently than we did. And so it's important to think, what would get my students engaged in the material? It could be using examples from movies and books that they've actually read, or just pick something that you know your students care about. If you know you're teaching a class and it's mostly majors, then pick activities that are tailor-made to those majors, so they have ownership and they're engaged. Our students aren't intrinsically motivated, so pick things that they can easily get passionate about. It's also great if you can add a little bit of competition, just some extra credit points here or there, or just make it a vote in general. Students thrive off competition.
It's also important to make the assignment nurturing for the students, and by that we mean have very, very clear instructions and clearly communicate your expectations for the assignment, because students can get very frustrated quickly and not engage with the material if they're just not sure what's expected of them. And so it's important, particularly with in-class assignments, that they're not on their own, that you're with them to answer any questions, and make sure that you can clarify anything as you go so that they can really immerse themselves in the learning experience without getting frustrated. And lastly, we feel like it's important for the learning activity to be part of the assessment for the class. Students do tend to engage and launch themselves more into activities that do count for something in terms of class grade.
We both want to share with you an example of a semi-slip that we both have used in our own classrooms. I teach both introductory biology, and then I also teach a genetics class. And I actually designed this activity in graduate school, and I've been tweaking it and using it since then. And what this is when we get to the genetics portion of the class, the traditional Mendel with his peas that you probably all remember from way back when, they tend to have struggle with the genetics problems. And the reason I picked this topic was because even if I gave them homework to do with problems, they still tend to miss the concepts on the exam. For lengthwise, I, before class, have my students prepare, and I make sure that they prepare by giving them a reading guide that is for points. And so that gives them that motivation to come in having at least familiarized themselves with the material. And then at the beginning of class, I'll do a mini lecture for the comfort level of all the students, and then we'll spend the rest of the class actually doing the activity. This activity is authentic. It's not real world per se, but my students feel a connection because most of them have read the books or watched the movies. Their roles, I put them in groups of 4. They each pick a specific either magical trait or physical characteristic, and they do the crosses and determine what the characteristics of a brand new offspring would look like. They all write down their answers to refer to for studying for the exam, and then one person shares their results with the entire class. It's very engaging for students because even if they haven't read these books before, it's fun to step outside of a traditional classroom and think creatively. As you can see on the slide, these are 3 examples of my previous students' art renditions of the offspring that they created in their Harry Potter world. My instructions I print out and give to them so that they have a tangible copy. And what I've done is, using feedback, I've changed and tweaked these instructions over the years. This assignment itself is an assessment. It's a quiz grade. And then I typically will use the crosses that they designed as exam questions.
The second example is one that I have designed for a microbiology classroom for students heading towards either medicine or pharmacy. And it's authentic because I put them in a scenario of being in a research and development group in a pharmaceutical firm. And the scenario is that the company as a whole, has been beaten to the market by a competitor for their soon-to-be exciting cardiovascular drug. And the CEO comes to their research and development group to ask for pitches for a novel antimicrobial drug to help them save some money. And for the team that wins, this is going to be a promotion, a pay raise, and of course, a little extra credit in my class. And so in terms of roles, each person in the group of 4 has a different role. The first student is the scientific director engaged in designing the rationale for the action of the drug, so the science behind the novel antimicrobial. And of course, to be able to do this, they have to go out and read what else is out there in the marketplace already. The second person in the group looks at the economics of bringing a drug through trials and into the marketplace. The third person looks at how they will market the drug, potential side effects, the pros and cons of their particular target. And the fourth person is a sort of managing director of the group, keeping the group on track, making sure they have followed the instructions. It's engaging because of the competition. I was frequently surprised. I remember the first or second time I did this, meeting a student in the corridor who was in a suit. And I asked him what he was doing today, and he looked at me sort of in a funny way, as if to say, I have your class today, it's for the presentation. And in the slide there, you see a mock-up of a drug. Students will provide me a marketing brochure and often a mock-up of their novel antimicrobial. So they really do get into it. And this is a class grade. They do a 15-minute pitch presentation, as well as providing me with information on their drug. So the main thing with new activities is to get feedback, both from the students and also sometimes other colleagues, for input, and find out what the students thought of the activity, what they learned, how they think it would help them, and what they would actually improve for the next go around.
So when you take the time to ask your students what worked and what didn't, it helps alleviate some of that crash and burn that can sometimes happen. And the more you do, the more you can change, and then the better the activity gets. One thing that I always include in my feedback is self-reflection, some metacognition. Oftentimes after their tests, I'll have them go through the questions they missed, and I'll have them explain why they thought they missed it, and maybe come up with better ways to have studied that particular material. And after every activity, I have them do self-reflection, if it's a short or a long activity, to see what they would do differently, and also what I do differently.
So that's what we have for you today, and we'd be delighted to take any questions.
Thank you so much, you guys. I think interspersed throughout this entire presentation, there are so many good ideas, just good teaching practice, in addition to the flipping part of it. So I think that was really great. If you have questions, you may either put them in the chat bar, or you can raise your hand if you want to take the mic, or we'll hand you the mic and you can ask them out loud. So go ahead and type your questions in the chat bar or raise your hand. And while we're waiting for folks to do that, I love what you guys are honoring here, which is the fact that not all students may be ready for the full flip, and that you guys are recognizing your student population, your specific topics, and really thinking about how to present each one for their learning. I feel like it also helps with the frequent student response that we hear to a flipped classroom, which is, why am I paying these experts to not teach me anything? They're making me teach myself. And I don't know if you guys have heard that, but that's something I hear a lot from folks who do flip classrooms. The students feel like they're not getting their money's worth from their schooled professors because they're having to teach themselves. Have you guys had that experience or that feedback from your students?
Absolutely. I think we both, that's why we both feel strongly that you have to do a good job with the design of the activity, and give clear instructions so that the students do have a positive experience, because you do give up a little of the control in your classroom. And I think that's absolutely fine as long as the students engage with it, enjoy it, and understand what's expected of you. We have both had experiences where students have come from a flipped program that was not what they felt nurtured them enough to actually meet the learning objectives, and then it is difficult.
I specifically last spring encountered this with my upper level genetics class. It's interesting, my lower level students, my first year students, they're apprehensive at first, but they actually get very excited about it. And I've had, by the end of the first test, they all say, oh, this really works. I wasn't anticipating my upper levels to give as much pushback. Even after their exams, they still were kind of resistant to acknowledging that their success could be attributed to the semi-flip. And so I had to kind of introduce more self-reflection than I had even anticipated, so that the students could, on their own, but with my push, figure out that, oh, this is working and it's maybe different, but we still are learning.
And I think that your course sometimes becomes known for these activities where students will talk to each other and say, oh, that was the best activity. I mean, mine frequently include assessment or presentations or things that take them out of their comfort zone. And yet when I ask for feedback at the end of the course, they'll frequently say, that was my favorite lab, or that was my favorite class session.
That's great. That's great.
Questions in the chat.
Oh, so we have some questions. Does it take a lot of prep time? Yes. I think to design a good activity, certainly if it's a long one, can take a long time, particularly when you refine it. I want to say 15 to 20 hours of time spent actually designing, maybe talking to colleagues, other students. Grading depends on, I think that with backward mapping, the grading, you usually start with a rubric of what you're expecting with the students. And so that can be actually quicker sometimes than, say, a straight essay or something like that, because you know from the beginning what you're expecting clearly from the students.
And what I've started doing to try to reduce my prep time, and last semester was the first time I did it, but I actually encouraged my students, if they could think of something that would help them to learn it, to bring that to me, and I would give them some extra credit for doing that. And so I've started a repository of my students' activities, and also I've encouraged, if I have TAs, part of their requirement is actually to design at least one flipped activity, and I help guide them through that. So that kind of helps me with the workload. And I completely agree, grading is a lot faster because you put the thought into the rubric ahead of time.
And I think that you can, as a group, when we did the course redesign here a couple of years ago, as a department, we created a repository of shared resources where people had got successful activities that worked with the student population. We then shared them as a department so we can kind of support each other through that.
And the next question, who assigns the roles to the students? For me, it depends on the activity. Sometimes I let the students self-assign, and then other times I assign and I try to have them do different roles with each activity.
I agree. I think this is a judgment call. Honestly, I mostly assign the students to roles, particularly if I do something like a short debate, because I think it's good for the students to get out of comfort zone and try something they wouldn't necessarily choose for themselves. I mean, it's worth the time to put that together, because what you often find is that you enjoy it every bit as much as the students. And it's one of those class sessions you really look forward to taking part in. I think is that all our questions?
Yeah, there's just Mark Vo had a couple of statements about how he or she designed theirs.
Right.
Yeah, I've seen it recommended, both ways, and I think the students sometimes feel happier if they're just given a role. As long as they know what that means.
Right, and I think another of the comments was doing a summary activity where the instructor consolidates the knowledge and helps the students remember the key points. But I'm not sure if what the statement is about is doing it as part of the session where the students help create that summary, which would be great to get them involved in that summary process.
I've certainly done that in the past with nursing students in particular with concept mapping, and have them either design or put onto the board a concept map. So I think that's a great idea.
As Elizabeth knows, I am a big fan of concept maps. Elizabeth and I worked together for many years at UGA, so we're familiar with one another's strategies here.
I might have been signing that.
Right. Well, we're so grateful for you guys for sharing your experiences and your best practices in flipping and semi-flipping and just teaching in general. If it's okay with you, we'll be sharing these slides with the participants,
Yeah,
and then we'll.
yeah.
Okay, great. And then we'll also send out a link to everyone to the YouTube video once that is posted. And so now I will hand it over to Mark to wrap us up. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you. We enjoyed it.